Hello, this is Lawrence R. Harvey, and you're listening to WithoutYourHead.com. Although, how you're listening to WithoutYourHead.com without your head, I simply don't know.
Welcome to the station of decapitation. I am Nasty Neil.
This is Annabelle Lecter.
Yes, and joining us here this evening, he's an extremely talented horror artist. We have Graham Humphreys on the line.
Hello.
Hello.
Great to have you here.
Yes. Now, we had met you real briefly recently, a couple months ago around Halloween time. And,
Absolutely, in Boston, yes.
Yeah, that was for the Edgar Allan Poe Project, and I'd like to know how you got involved in that project.
Through my friend Brian Moore, the sculptor,
Yeah.
and we had worked with the H.P. Lovecraft Bronze Bust project previously, another successful campaign. And so Brian came back to me for a kind of repeat, I guess. And we're currently working on a third project, very similar themed piece. And perhaps this time the unveiling may well be in the UK.
Ooh. Well, that'll be convenient.
For me, yes, not for anybody else.
Sure. Yeah.
How many times have you been to the United States?
I've been a few times actually. The first time I went to America was probably about 1981 or two. I went with a few friends. We took a flight on Laker Airways, remember those, to New York, and we took a Greyhound bus all the way to Denver, and then we hired a car and drove to LA via Las Vegas.
Huh. So you've actually seen the United States more than I have, and I've lived here my whole life.
You need to get out more.
From a very small town.
I was just saying, I assume we can't talk
since
about
you've been here, and obviously you've lived over there. So, who do you think appreciates your art more? Or is it just had a universal appeal? Because it is. It's fantastic. It's not too crazy out there. You know, you do such beautiful work, and the colors are amazing, and the details are great. So, who do you think is the best audience?
Well, it's an interesting question because I've always considered my work to be particularly British in its approach. And that's odd because in many ways, like many others, I've been influenced very much by people like Drew Struzan. And I guess that I think my work was shaped particularly through my college years, through the music scene at the time, and certainly in the early 80s as well. I used to go to a little club called the Bat Cave, which was, I guess, the sort of fledgling Gothic kind of place to be in London at the time, certainly sort of post-punk. And I was listening to bands like Susie and the Banshees, the Cramps, the Gun Club, and you know, some of the old punk rock stuff. And certainly that was the music which kind of influenced my approach to my work, both in color, texture, and certainly some of the aggressive brush marks. And I guess in a way, I was trying to emulate the sound via the visuals. So for me, really, that's where I began and where I'd placed myself. And I'd always considered the US music scene to be slightly different to the UK scene. I mean, obviously there's crossover stuff, but I really didn't ever imagine my work would have any appeal in the States. And it's really only in the last decade or so that probably through the medium of, you know, the internet, and particularly, I have to say, Facebook has been a great tool in introducing my work to other people. So I think it's only really very recently that my work's been seen elsewhere, I guess. I mean, certainly my work was known, you know, to an extent, I guess, in the 80s here. And there really was probably sort of a darker period where, I mean, I was still illustrating, but in other areas. And perhaps, I guess, with the demise of Palace Pictures, who were my main client at the time, certainly with the Evil Dead films and the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and some of the video companies who were around at the time. I guess when they went down, perhaps the whole sort of industry had changed somewhat, and certainly around that time also, of course, we all started using computers, and Photoshop pretty much shot illustration dead. I mean, I think people just assumed that it was cheaper to do photo comps. Of course, probably many people know now that actually it can often be more expensive to use that method. But yeah, so I think that the last few years have seen a bit of a renaissance in illustration. I guess it provides a sort of an alternative to the sort of slicker work that we're used to seeing now in film posters.
Hmm. Now, do you still use music for influence, or when you're drawing or painting?
I do as much as I can. I don't like really sitting with earphones in, and because I work in a space with other people, it just seems quite kind of selfish to do that. If I'm working at home, then yes, absolutely. But occasionally, I feel the need, for that little bit of a kick. And certainly last week, I've been going back to Susie and the Banshees, funnily enough, and Killing Joke, and a few other old favourites. So yeah, it does play an influence still.
I'm jealous. Very jealous.
Now, you said about kind of a renaissance of I don't know, illustration instead of computer generated graphics for box art and whatnot. I also see that in the movies themselves. There is a lot going back to using practical effects instead of CGI. And I've always thought maybe that is because people who grew up watching that kind of thing, now that they're making movies, they kind of want to do what they saw. And I know Annabelle said sometimes more is like kind of the novelty is worn off of a lot of the computer generated things. Why do you think the reason is that it's kind of gone back to more like a traditional way of doing the art?
Well, I think number one, I think you're absolutely right in as much there's a generation who have now come of an age where they're actually able to make films themselves. Perhaps they are at an age where they got the finance to do that, or they're building up their own business. But certainly, yes, there is a look back to the stuff that made them excited when they were younger. I mean, all the films they loved seeing. Yeah, of course, there's lots of physical effects, and certainly we're talking about stuff way before the computer generated. So, but for me, I think in the same way that my work is still physical paint on paper rather than tablet work, that there is a sense of sort of a hands-on kind of physicality. There's a sense that there's a craft going on. I think that the idea of craftsmanship is actually something which is quite appealing, that you actually know there's a real human there actually manipulating physical matter, and then you actually see the results of it as well, though. And I think that kind of people are aware that there's a human element in there which perhaps might have been missing with the technology, which kind of does kind of cut out some of the error.
I do feel very similar because I make art myself, and I've used the Wacom tablet, and it is interesting how much easier these things are. And I've really debated with myself and other people feeling so loyal to traditional methods of making art. I don't really use Photoshop to color a lot of things unless they're very simple things. But it's tearing at me because I see so many people doing things with it, and is that kind of, are we just the old-fashioned people that someday, what we're doing is just going to go by the wayside and people are going to really consider this an art? And should we have more respect for it from our point of view? Because it's very hard for me too. So how do you feel about that?
Well, really, I feel that whatever works best is right at the end of the day. You kind of need to have some sort of efficiency in what you do. And, there are all sorts of means to an end. I mean, for myself, I just love the physicality of paint. I like making a mess. You know, the wall in front of me is always covered in paint, and you know, to me, I know there's a process going on there, and it's a process which I can't always completely control. That being said, I've also seen a lot of work, which has been tablet work, and yeah, it looks amazing. I have to say, I've seen some incredible stuff, and for myself, I use something called designer's gouache, which is a water-based opaque paint. I've tried using acrylic, and I've not really got on with it very well. Oils, you know, drying time just makes things impractical to do. But yeah, for myself, I prefer the paint on paper. It gives me the sort of effects that I want, which I would be hard put, I think, to try and recreate on a tablet. Although, you know, this being said, there are some amazing bits of software out there which do, you know, you get all the paper textures, you get the wetness of the paint, and you can control all of that. And of course, you have the ability to do stuff in layers and go back and change things, go back to where you were to start with. Whereas the painting process I use, pretty much once you started, you have to go with what you've begun with. Otherwise, you're going to be starting from scratch again. And it's not practical to do that at all.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I appreciate, is that when you're doing things the traditional way, there's really no turning back in so many ways. That if you're doing Photoshop, you have a save point and you can go back to that save point. There's no save point when you're painting or drawing, unless you can paint over and layer in certain kinds of paints, but it's a big commitment when you're working that way.
Well, I think it takes a leap of faith. It takes a bit of confidence as well. And I've been building up the confidence over the years, and, you know, there's still hesitant moments, and I think any artist will have that anyway, though. But yeah, I think the confidence thing is quite important, especially when you're working with a deadline, and, you know, it is a deadline-driven business, I have to say. So, you know, I find myself producing work, you know, it has to be 2 days or 3 days, maximum 4 days. So you have to work very fast, and in many ways, you can only do that if you're confident about what you're doing, and also in your head, you have a sort of end result which you're aiming towards, and, you know, all the little accidents that happen en route to get there quite often enrich the final piece anyway, though. And so, you know, it's one of those things, and, you know, for me, I don't think that would work in quite the same way if I were working digitally. But, you know, that's me, though.
No, were you always into horror even before you started to be a professional artist?
I was into horror the moment I could walk, probably. I just think that I remember just seeing things on TV when I was a toddler, and I guess that I've always been drawn to otherness. There's no other way to put it, really. I guess, you know, you look around the world that you can see, and you know, some things appeal, some things don't, and you find your way. And for myself, I'm now 54, and I remember seeing the very first episode of Doctor Who on TV. I'd have been about 3, and it's just one of those little things that sticks in your mind. You just know you're looking at something which is kind of other, but actually being too young to quite understand why. And then as I sort of got a little older, then I sort of saw the reruns of you know, the Monsters, the Addams Family, Lost in Space, all that kind of stuff, growing up in the 60s. And that's all the TV programs that really stayed with me. And only at the later point, when they started showing sort of late night horror stuff on UK TV, then that's where I really discovered my love of horror film, and you know, particularly the Hammer films, as I sort of went into my teen years. So that's really, you know, kind of my big influences, and certainly it was always there as long as I can remember. But also, I think, you know, I learned to read quite an early age, and as soon as I was able at school, just picking out from the library all the sort of more macabre stuff. I mean, certainly is where I discovered Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, for instance, and I'd read you know, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde, quite an early age, and really probably too young to understand some of the deeper kind of themes within there, some of the political sort of psychosexual stuff that might have been going on. But in terms of stimulating my imagination, those books were pivotal, I'd say.
While we're on the subject of horror movies you enjoy and how that's influenced your work and where you're at right now, how do you feel about where modern horror has gone? It's changing in so many different ways, from things being over-commercialized to very extreme topics. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my personal thoughts would be that I've always been slightly turned off by what has been subsequently termed torture porn. Sadism for the sake of it just doesn't seem. I just feel uncomfortable with it, to be quite honest. However, I have to say that I've seen a lot of new horror stuff over the last 2 years, which I've found quite exciting, and I think people are actually reaching out into other areas and playing around with the genre, and I think it's kind of almost discovered its mojo again. I mean, certainly the film that's really had an impact on me recently was What We Do in the Shadows, the New Zealand vampire film, which is it's very funny, but it also is very reverential to the whole genre, particularly the vampire werewolf genre, and actually takes it into new areas. Another great film I saw last year was Housebound, again, another New Zealand film. And I know the Babadook has sort of divided people. Some find it a little bit disappointing. I personally found it a really interesting, exciting exploration of another area of horror, which I think that is kind of missing sometimes. So I think that it's in a very healthy state at the moment. I think people are actually genuinely experimenting and actually producing some really, really good new genre stuff. And I think that, this bodes well for the future.
It's interesting. We were having a conversation with another guest the other day and talking about how horror, it's almost like it's now a parallel to what quote unquote normal people watch, where we had this very standard traditional style of horror, but now we have horror comedy, horror romance, horror this, horror that, and it's like an entire mirror of what the popular culture is through horror.
Yes, I'm not too sure about that, but I think that there's an accessibility, and I think taboos are being sort of smashed to an extent, and I think that there is obviously the respectable face of horror, certainly that you see in the franchise stuff and the sequels. There is still, I think, an area of transgressive horror, and I'm not talking about the torture porn, because to me that's actually quite cliched anyway, though, and actually in many ways just another face of the commercial part of it. But I think there's some interesting work which actually does explore areas which aren't really talked about, though, and I'll go back to the Babadook again, which sort of a film about grief, I guess, more than anything else. So, and how that can affect the human psyche, and I think that was just the horror genre is a good sort of area for exploring things which are otherwise uncomfortable to talk about. So I don't know if that's kind of what if that's the area you're talking about now.
Well, not even just the things that are very deep psychological level, but you've got like the Shaun of the Dead, and you've got the whole Twilight stuff, and so you have the really deep, intense stuff, and then you've got this very light things that just wouldn't have existed. We wouldn't have had The Walking Dead or American Horror Story or Dexter, all these things. So certainly in America, we have more and more and more mainstream horror.
I see what you're saying now. Yeah. Apologies, I may have just misheard you. But absolutely, no. It's certainly gone mainstream. There's no doubt about that. And I think that again, I think it's probably to do with some of the taboos that have always been there. I mean, that there's arguably a sort of a religious lobby which has always fought against sort of transgression, and I think that horror films have always been considered to be slightly transgressive. I mean, certainly, look at reviews of some of the early Universal monster films, and even the very early Hammer films were all quite viciously attacked by mainstream press and reviewers, and certainly, religious institutions. I think that we've kind of got over that, I hope, and it's now out there for people to explore and really find, I guess, a new response in a way. I think that perhaps, where just merely being a genre film actually pigeonholed it in many ways, and made it therefore unwatchable for a large part of the population. I think that now that doesn't exist anymore. I think that a horror film can be. I mean, I remember years ago reading an interview with Peter Cushing, and he was talking about what he understood to be horror, and he said that for him, and we're going back to the 70s now, he said that for him horror was a film like The Godfather, which depicted very violent individuals, scenes of indiscriminate killing, which were based very much in I guess the reality of organized crime. To him, that was far more appalling than seeing, a sort of a mad doctor creating a little monster, which was so clearly not real. So, what you describe as horror, I think that again is a sort of a shifting area.
Along those lines, where because I know when I did a panel for Dawn of the Dead, and Ken Free said, people now see that as a classic film, but when he made it, like actual friends of him stopped talking to him, and it kind of blackballed him from making mainstream films because he was involved with it. As an artist, do you think that horror people that work in the horror genre get the proper credit for their artwork, and do you think that's changed over the times?
Well, that's a hard one as well, because I look back at some of the beautiful posters for the original Universal horrors. If you think about the sort of Art Deco posters created for films like Frankenstein and King Kong, I mean, they're beautiful pieces of artwork, and I don't think they were considered any less so at the time, to be quite honest. For myself, just from personal experience, I don't think that my work has been sort of ostracized or in any way thought less of because I've worked in the horror genre. Certainly, as a professional illustrator, I've had to illustrate all sorts of things, which are certainly not non-genre. I've been doing work within the educational sector, advertising, book cover work, magazine illustration work, all sorts of different things. So the horror it has been one aspect of what I do, although I have to say that it's probably the primary aspect of what I do now, simply because of the volume of work that's coming in. But I don't know if that kind of has worked in quite the same way as it has for actors and actresses. Certainly, I do remember an event I went to about a year ago, and some of the women who are still with us from some of the early Hammer films were talking about working within the genre, and people did advise them against doing it, and it was considered slightly sleazy to be doing some of those films, and for them it was really about survival. You got paid for your day's work, 2 days work, whatever, and you forgot about it. You went on to the next project. So it was very much a jobbing kind of thing. And yet here they are, years later, decades later, actually, celebrated at conventions for being these, amazing icons of horror in a genre that is, completely respected, and those films are revered. And at the time, that just wasn't the case.
Yeah, and probably don't talk much about the other work that they've done, outside of the horror genre, because that stuff might be not as remembered or have conventions for. So,
well, I think you're right there. Yes, absolutely.
Have you done a lot of conventions yourself?
Well, not really. In the last year and a half or so, I've been invited to a few things, and I still think that my work is finding its place outside of the UK. So that's something which may change. I was very honoured to be invited to the Weekend of Horrors in Germany last year, and I had been asked to convention in Antwerp, and a couple of other places as well. So yeah, that could be changing.
Hmm. Now you said you remember watching your first horror movie, your first thing, as you put it, otherworldly. Do you remember the first either TV show or horror movie that you actually drew?
I think that would have been you mean something that I would have done at home, just my own
Yeah.
sort of
Hmm.
personal kind of
Yeah,
work.
not professional. Yeah, as
Yeah,
a
yeah,
as a
yeah.
kid. Hmm.
Oh well, I mean, I think as soon as I could start drawing, I was drawing Daleks and skeletons, and so yeah, I guess Doctor Who would have been the first TV series to actually, make me want to actually create something on paper.
Hmm. Did you?
Did horror lead you into illustration? Were you primarily, because when I was a kid, I drew a lot of different horror-oriented stuff. Were you doing all different kinds of things, and now you've finally, as you've said, you've done all different kinds of work, all different styles for all different kinds of clients. So what got you in? Were you initially drawn in because you were interested in making horror art, or did that just become a fortunate circumstance where now you're able to do that primarily?
I think that when I first started working, having left college, absolutely, I was looking to do horror film poster work, and the people I used to go and see when I was toting my folio around were the different film companies that had offices in London. I did go to Universal and MGM, all the people I could think of, really, and largely the work, just didn't seem appropriate, and people would politely look at the stuff, and then that'd be the last I'd ever hear of it. And then I think one company just took the punt, and I found myself doing my first poster. One that I'm a bit embarrassed about. It's not a very successful piece of work, but annoyingly, people do remember it though. But to be quite honest, I think it wasn't until Palace Pictures commissioned the Evil Dead poster that it really took off, and that's really my touchstone. And beyond that, it's quite interesting that I've created a new version of that poster recently for a client as a private commission, and we'll be looking at probably the Evil Dead 2 next. And it's just quite funny going back to projects which you kind of think 10 years after doing them, you kind of had almost forgotten about them because you'd moved on. However, it's great to understand that these images lingered with people, and people that saw those images when they were kids, actually, in video shops and the like, are now in a position to commission themselves, and that's what they want to commission.
Mhm. That,
So were you led into doing the Evil Dead poster originally?
Well, like many things in life, it's all about being in the right place at the right time, and it's not stuff that you can control. And I was just very, very fortunate that a chance meeting with somebody who wasn't going to give me work, but did say a new company has been set up called Palace Pictures. Why don't you go and see them? And at that point, they had just moved into film distribution. They just released a film called Diva, and their next film, just by pure coincidence, was going to be The Evil Dead. I didn't know that at the time. I went to visit them, but they obviously responded to the artwork, and lo and behold, about a week later, got a call saying, "Will you come in and have a look at this film? We'd like you to consider doing the poster." And the rest is, a career.
what did you think of the movie the first time you saw it?
Well, I loved it. I mean, how could I not? I mean, it had everything that I loved in it. Just apart from amazing colours and some very original and very funny concepts. It just threw everything at the screen, and just it was so frenzied and so different and fresh to everything else I'd seen. In a way, it was like all my favourite moments from the Hammer films rolled into one big thing times 100. And it was phenomenal. I actually sat in the cinema on my own and watched it. Actually, a bit worried about what on earth might be on the screen next, because it was one of those films where you really didn't know how far it would actually take itself and how far it would go.
Mhm.
And I have to say, it kind of delivered. And I was absolutely delighted, and it was such an honor to work on that film.
Yeah. I remember when I was fairly young, and I don't condone bootlegging films or anything, but at the time it was hard to get Evil Dead on VHS, and that was a big movie that everyone would have a bootleg of. And I remember my brother's 9 years older, and he would take me to parties or whatever, and they'd all be watching Evil Dead. You know, they'd be all excited because they'd have the bootleg, and yeah.
Well, the Palace were quite shrewd. I think perhaps they had anticipated that was going to happen, so they decided to experiment, and in the UK, they simultaneously released the film at the cinema and on VHS, which I don't think had been done before. Usually there was something like a 5-year holdback before something would appear on video, but they decided to take the plunge, and it was very successful. I mean, people went to the cinema still, and they bought it on VHS as well.
Yeah.
Of course, VHS then were considerably more expensive than they are now,
Yeah.
or were rather. But yeah, it did very well for them.
Yeah, they were like when I was I know when we started buying, they were like $85, I think, for
Yes.
a VHS. They're quite a bit.
Yes, it was silly money, and that's why people would just mostly rent them rather than buy them. And I do remember doing video sleeves, and I used to do the main artwork, which would be the layout on the back and everything else. And you end up supplying 3 different formats. You'd supply a Betamax version, a VHS rental version, and a VHS sell-through version.
Huh.
And I guess even more recently, I remember you do a DVD version and a Blu-ray version,
Right.
and in the early days of DVD, you would do 2 versions, a rental and a sell-through version as well. So yeah, that could be a little bit annoying.
Yeah. Now, we've mentioned lots of times on the show. I've been watching horror movies since I can remember. My mom used to take me to the drive-in to see them. And now, were your parents okay with you watching any type of films?
I think they were probably a little bit overprotective, and I do remember when I was quite young, Psycho was being shown on TV, and I was allowed to stay up. But I do remember about 10 minutes before the end, my father came down, urged by my mother, to actually just tell me what actually I was going to be seeing, and thus ruining the ending for me. I think they thought, well, preempt the terror and stop me from being traumatized by actually just spoiling it. So I think that was probably the first instance that I remember. But also, I think that I remember going to a department store at the time that Hammer released an LP, which was a narrated piece by Christopher Lee, and then I think on the other side it had some music from some of the Hammer films, and the image on the front was Christopher Lee, and I believe it's Caroline Munro with a very bloody neck, and they kind of discouraged me from buying it, and actually I got a little pep talk at home just saying, son, we're worried about you. Years later, I found the LP and I did buy it, and I thought, what was all that about? But yeah, I think they kind of, again, I think it's that whole thing I was talking about earlier on with this sense of taboo, that some things are just best left and not to be touched. But of course, you look back at those films now, and there's a sort of quite a tender innocence about them.
Yeah. Do you remember what horror movies have you found like actually either disturbing or scary?
It's an interesting one as well. I find quite odd things disturbing within the context of say the horror genre. I remember one of the things that upset me the most was the electrocution scene in Green Mile. I remember being actually really deeply disturbed and actually quite upset by it, and I sort of went into a bit of a depression for about 2 weeks after that. And yeah, sort of looking back at it, it's a moment with sort of special effects and the like, but for some reason, it actually really sort of affected me. I think that perhaps that's probably been the only time I've actually deeply been affected by a film. The Green Mile, it's you obviously know the film, but it's
Mhm.
yeah, it's got Tom Hanks in it. And you think, well, what could be possibly scary in a Tom Hanks film? But there you go.
Yep. I always thought that's one of the best Stephen King adaptations is Green Mile.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, of the ones I've seen, it was very effective, and and not just for that one scene, it had a lot of very disturbing, upsetting stuff in it. I guess that I obviously responded to that in a way that perhaps maybe not everybody would have done. And it's kind of hard to see how people do respond sometimes. I mean, as I mentioned, the Babadook earlier on, which I actually did find quite terrifying when I watched it, and then friends who had subsequently seen it, who actually don't like horror films, had sort of sat there and found it to be quite unengaging, and I was quite astonished by that lack of reaction.
Yeah. That's we actually reviewed that recently in a video which will be up soon, and a lot of people in the horror world, considered it the scariest film in years.
Yeah,
Together.
he said it's the scariest movie he'd ever seen. So my hopes are up very high.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? That
I
I
would,
guess it's if you're well versed in your horror, then you probably understand that it's I guess it's hitting certain notes, and you know that from those tropes that actually you're not too sure where those notes are going to go, and perhaps if you're less attuned to the horror genre, perhaps you're just viewing it without that sort of background knowledge of what potential might be in there. That's just a wild guess there, but for me, yeah, it's interesting that if you're a die-hard horror fan, you can actually find it quite frightening, and if you're not, then suddenly it's not frightening, which it doesn't seem to make any sense, does it really?
Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. I really liked the book in the movie. I just want to. What was your opinion of the artwork of the book itself? As an artist.
Oh, I liked it. I liked it. I thought that it did that thing that children's books often did anyway. I mean, I think I recall children's books being quite terrifying, and I think that certainly when you look at the morality tales of yeah, the sort of late Victorian era, and you look at the way children were always being cruelly punished for transgressions. Yeah, quite terrifying stuff, and I think it really played on that. And I love the way that the book developed as the film went
Yeah.
on, just got darker and darker, and it couldn't be destroyed. And again, you kind of just didn't know how far it was going to go. I wasn't too sure if the book was somehow going to come to life, uh, and certainly the creature began to look more and more terrifying. So actually, you really were in dread of actually seeing the real physical version of it, which of course, well, actually, I won't. There may be people who haven't seen the film, so I'm not going to spoil it.
Yeah. How did you get involved in The Editor? This is a movie we've talked about in the last few weeks. We had Lawrence Harvey on the show, and absolutely great poster you did for the movie.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well,
it definitely sucks you in because I saw the poster and I love Lawrence. We both love Lawrence, but seeing it, you just get excited. Like this is going to be amazing.
well, I'm glad you liked it. And when I was commissioned, initially, they were asking me to create the posters, which you see in the film. Um, God, I can't remember the bloody title now. Is it the Mirror and the Guillotine or something like that? But I was commissioned to do some posters that would just appear in the film and be sort of almost cliche genre pieces, evoking the Italian style of the sort of late 70s, early 80s, and I think at that point Adam had said that we'll do these, but it would be great if you could do the final poster for us as well. And I guess that was very much about funding at the time, that they had little bits of money coming in every now and again to spend on little bits of artwork, but yeah, they came through and said, look, we've got this money, we want to pay you to do the poster, and that's how it happened. And I think the results seem to have been sort of well received by everybody involved. Certainly, they were very easy to deal with, and Adam had a fairly good idea of the sort of feel he wanted for it, and he was very keen on it looking very illustrated and quite painterly as well. And I think that he was very good in supplying some good reference material. I did say that actually, you know, what I really envisage is a sort of almost like a sacrificial altar. And within a day, he'd take some photographs, the actress lying across the editing machine, and you know, they were perfect. I mean, the lighting was great, and you know, it's almost, you always hope for great reference. I mean, most illustrators do work with reference. You know, it took me years to get over this idea that it might be cheating to actually copy photographs, but I realised that, of course, this is what we all do and what we have to do, otherwise it just doesn't look lifelike.
How do you feel about having a lot of input from a director or whoever is involved in what you're making, the person who's commissioning it, where they, are there times when people are almost too involved and sort of cramping you down, or do you prefer having lots and lots of direction?
I think it's important that the input is there at the beginning. Any job I do, it's good to have a firm foundation for your ideas, that the director is really the person who should be able to give you that initial input. Just say, look, this is the sort of feel we're going for, or I want to focus on this or that, or perhaps even to say, look, let's not even go into the main imagery, let's try something different. It's different with each job, and people do have their own ways of trying to shape what you do, and mostly for the good, sometimes not quite so much so. I think where it gets difficult is when you've actually started to progress the job and you've got to a point where really for you, you've already you're already on the path to the finished product. And at that point, then when somebody wades in and says, well, actually, can we just change this now? Or this is not working for me. You think, well, actually, you know, you had that opportunity to start with. Why are we doing this now? So, yes, there can be cases where you find yourself being obstructed slightly, and it happens very rarely, to be quite honest. Mostly, I'm very happy to say that my clients tend to be very amenable and yeah, forthright with their ideas right up front. So, you know, this doesn't happen that often. It does happen, but not often.
What did you do with the posters that you made for the fake films in the editor, the movies within the movie, I guess?
The in terms of the artwork itself,
yeah. Did you keep them, or they have them?
oh yeah, certainly. Well, there are three paintings, and the fourth one was was rendered on a computer for partly for expediency, and also partly because I did want to create something which looked slightly different to the other three. They're quite crude paintings, you know. They're done quite fast, but at the same time, that's the feel I wanted to evoke anyway. That to me, it's important they be done very fast, because I wanted them to, as if, you know, they were exploitation films, that, you know, you had a little office there and they farm out some artists and say, you know, do this, we got, you know, 6 hours to get this out, because actually that used to happen. So it seemed apt that they should be quite you know, quite aggressive and hastily formed. As I say, the fourth one was you know, a piece of work on the computer. However, I think it's still got quite a nasty raw edge to it.
No, have people who have seen the editor? I know it hasn't had a huge release yet or anything, but there's people seeing the convention stuff. Have they, you know, fans of yours come to you and notice those in the background?
Yes, they have. And yeah, that's great. They were very generous with their credit at the end of the film, which, you know, completely identifies that that's the case. I think that anybody that knows my work would probably recognise the style fairly swiftly anyway. And if not, then perhaps, well, that might be a good thing as well, because it means they blend into the overall texture of the film. But certainly, Astron 6 were quite sort of kind in their early nods, that they did actually mention this in you know, on Twitter and you know, social media. So it's documented, and so yeah, most people would actually know.
Yeah. What did you think of the movie itself?
I liked it. I was quite surprised when I saw it for the first time because I had seen a couple of little rushes, but I think that it was actually more pure to what it wanted to be than I imagined it could ever be, and even with the the bad dubbing and the bit of subtitling here and there, it really captured that sort of raw kind of edge of the early Bava stuff and Argento. Uh, Films that actually I actually almost felt I was watching a period piece. But of course, it's Astron 6, and they have this fantastic kind of extra sensibility, which is has this incredible humor running through it. It's as irreverent as it is reverential. So you're kind of always caught between the two worlds, and I think that makes it a very interesting film to watch.
Yeah, I loved it a lot. Sort of in a different way though, like when you talk about Babadook, that if you're well versed in horror, then maybe you find it more horrific. But for that movie, the more you know about those type of films, I think the funnier you'll find the film.
Yes, exactly. It's a very rich film in terms of its influences and references, and literally from moment to moment, you kind of you're familiar with what's going on, but from something else which is slightly different. So there's a familiarity, and also it's like it's like having old friends around almost, though.
Yeah. What was the first movie that you? Oh, I believe you said it was Evil Dead, right? Was the first movie
Yeah,
that
I did a couple of posters before that. For me, they're not very good pieces, and I'm sort of slightly embarrassed about them. However, you have to start somewhere, and in those instances, they were quite heavily art directed, so there wasn't really the freedom to create the sort of I guess the feel of the Evil Dead poster. I mean, that was the first project where I really had complete and utter freedom. That there was virtually no art direction there at all, in a good kind of way. It wasn't that they didn't want to direct me; it's just that they'd rather I saw the film and responded to it in the way that I felt fit. And yeah, that worked perfectly for me and for them.
Yeah. Well, what are some of your current projects?
Some of it's confidential, obviously for reasons of people don't want to let you know what they're going to be releasing up and coming. But I can actually say that I've got a 3 or 4 private commissions where I've been asked to imagine a poster had I been commissioned in the first place, or to do a poster in my style for a film. At least 2 of those are classic films. The other one is a more recent film. And again, these are private commissions, and it's just quite interesting to work with a poster where you have absolute freedom and can just do what you want without the commercial constraints that often you might have. For instance, you work on a poster and it's said that well, you must have this character in it because that's the name that's going to sell. And you think, well, actually, they're not important in a film, and why should they be on there? So I can make those decisions. I've got a number of DVD, Blu-ray projects coming up. A couple for Arrow Films, who are now, of course, going to be US based as well. A company called Odeon Entertainment here in the UK, who release sort of older, interesting, odd little gems from the past. One of them is a film I've not seen before. I'm going to enjoy watching it when the screener comes through, but it stars Robin Asquith, funnily enough, from the Confessions films, the sort of cheeky chappy, slightly soft core porn films from the early 70s, who, funnily enough, I'm going to be seeing talking at a cinema event at the end of this month. Robin Asquith talking about his work in film and his career. So that's a funny little coincidence. But yeah, other than that, I've got some projects which are development projects in terms of creating visuals for projects that are yet to come to fruition. And again, a couple of private commissions as well. And there's actually a strange kind of fine art project which is popped up, which is going to be quite interesting. So yeah, there's a bit of a variety there.
Who are some contemporary artists or illustrators who you do respect, whose work you admire and enjoy?
Well, there's a lot of people out there, and the world of illustration, it seems to have expanded of late, and that's obviously great. I mean, we all need competition in order to actually feel that we're achieving something better. We need something to measure ourselves against, and it's also stimulating seeing other people's work as well. Here in the UK, Tom Hodge is a contemporary who he's working digitally, but his work has a very painterly feel to it. Though it's very evocative of an era, and really, yeah, there's some of the some of the guys who've been out there for some time now are still producing work that is still inspiring me now. So there's a list of names. It's kind of almost too extensive to go through, but I'll say that I'm very happy to see them all out there.
You don't have to name names, but is it harder for you to work to do a piece for a movie that you might not enjoy yourself?
That's an interesting question. As an illustrator, you're always going to end up doing work that you find you have no real affinity for, and I think my job is to find the reasons to be infused, and this is what I've always done. I've done a lot of covers for films I've not enjoyed, and what you have to do is actually go back into them and then identify the things actually you can respond to, and then find ways of liking the film, which may not be the obvious ways. And this is what I've always done. And every film has its merits, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I've never seen. I mean, even the worst films I've ever seen, there's always something in there that you can pull out and actually think, well, actually, this is enjoyable, or this is a moment I like, or this is an image which works well. So, for that reason, I don't find it a problem at all. Though, I mean, as I say, I've done a lot of work for projects that, on the surface, I wouldn't have enjoyed, and yet, it's your job to find those hidden sort of moments within, or the sort of nuggets within that actually do work.
Do you enjoy that challenge to kind of seek out those little bits?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think the work should be challenging. Otherwise, it probably can be a bit sort of predictable and dull. I think that you do need to be forced to find the things that actually work. I think that if it's too easy, then it's just not interesting. And I don't think the end result is interesting either. I think there needs to be some sort of birth pain in there. And if it's difficult for me at that first moment, where you're actually you're going through the creative process of trying to eke out those images and see what's going to work and what isn't going to work, and sift through the various layers. I think that you kind of actually feel more satisfied at the end of the day, that you've actually been able to produce something, create something from nothing sometimes. The challenge, I think the challenge is important.
I want to mention your website's grahamhumphreys.com, and you can check out all the different artwork you've done, and you can buy prints and check out stuff. But what would you say is not necessarily your favorite, but would be the most popular piece that you've done?
From the different recent conventions, it's certainly people are still responding to the first Nightmare on Elm Street poster I did, and it's either The Evil Dead or The Evil Dead 2. I guess people, they have a comprehension that there's some sort of these images have had some longevity, and I think people understand that actually that means that they have worked for whatever reason for them, but for other people as well. So, those sort of classic pieces are the ones that are remembered and I guess sought after to an extent. I mean, certainly people will tell me that they've if they've been able to find a copy on eBay or something, and it's gone for such an amount of money, And I think the Evil Dead poster, for instance, the first UK printing of that was fairly limited. So I'm not convinced there are that many around, whether it was 1,000 or less even. However, they do pop up still. But certainly that's what people always respond to.
I'm a big fan of the one you did for a Basket Case, which that's one of my favorite movies anyway. But I think you did a great job on that one. On all of them, but that one I think is very cool.
Well, I enjoyed doing that as well, and I do remember painting it and actually laughing as I was painting it because actually it was such a funny image, and I thought, well, is it reverential to the film or is it not? And I kind of thought, well, actually, it is in the spirit of the film, actually, and I still like it myself, though.
Yeah,
I've still got the original painting.
Yeah, I even like the background too, the how it kind of blends into like the city, and I like everything about it.
Well, I had fun painting it.
Very cool. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but Kevin Van Hentendrink, the star of Basket Case, he carves stone now.
Oh, right.
He's a stone, so he's an artist as well, and so you can actually, it's a free course. You can go and learn the ancient art of stone carving from Kevin Van Hentendrink.
Well, that's interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's something we've done the last 2 years.
Is it course you've done yourself?
Yeah, Annabelle and I have taken the trip and done that the last 2 years, and hopefully again this year.
Fantastic. Yeah, he's fantastic.
What have you carved?
What's that? He carves stone, giant pieces of stone. He carves little stones too, but he does lots of different kinds of carving, I should say, because he does wood carving. So he does signs, and then he does, like a commercial artist, he'll do signs, and then he'll do his own work, all different kinds of things. Kevin Van Hentendrink, wonderful guy, amazing teacher, so patient with everyone. He's fantastic.
I should be looking this up straight away.
We'll send you the links. I think Graham actually asked what did you actually carve?
Yes, what did I carve? I carved. Well, the way they have it set up is that it's a very small town. Most of its income throughout the year is from skiing, so they try to bring people in the summertime. So the town hall actually provides these giant glacial boulders that are, I mean, they're not, house high, but they're very, very big. And everybody can take their own little space. So my space that I've been working on both years in a row is I'll send you the picture. It's a snake that comes down out of the stone and wraps around a single flower, which I like very much. It looks pretty good. They seem impressed. That's mine. And then I did another small rock because if it's raining out, they have tents set up. So you can take something in and still work during the day instead of being pushed away by the rain. And so I have one rock that I turned into, I used the shape of the rock and made it into a woman who's looking down into her hands.
Wow, it sounds very satisfying. I mean, we're talking about sort of hands-on work, and you can't get more hands-on than stone carving, can you?
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing because you've got these power tools, but you can do so many delicate things when you get the hang of it, and you can, I started using these teeny little tools, and it's still a power tool, but you just barely graze along, and it's wonderful. Have you ever done any sculpting on anything like that with any kind of power tools or metalworking or anything like that?
I have not, no. Sadly, I haven't. That's not to say it will never happen, but at this moment in time, no. The one thing I have tried in a very small, literally very small way, is taxidermy. I've stuffed a mouse and I've stuffed a hamster.
A hamster? Is that what I heard?
Yes, it was a hamster.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So was it the hamster that inspired you to do taxidermy, or was it taxidermy before the hamster?
I think it was just the concept of doing taxidermy. But, taxidermy is a very skilled craft, and it can look very, very bad. With a mouse, you can't really go wrong because, it's a tiny little thing. It's going to end up like a little hairy sausage, whatever you do. I'm sort of quite interested in taxidermy. I'm just quite fascinated by the whole sort of Victorian kind of concept of trying to make animals that doing human things. It's very odd. And I remember seeing. I went to the. It's the Potter's Museum of Curiosities, I believe, which used to be at the Jamaica Inn in Bodmin Moor in the sort of south of England. Bodmin Moor, of course, is where the Hound of the Baskervilles was set in Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes book. But there's this amazing place, Jamaica Inn, which featured in Lorna Doone, I believe, classic book. But yes, this amazing collection of taxidermy was housed in the back of this building, and among them they had the very famous, kitten's wedding. There were squirrels at school. There were rats playing, card games. All these kind of bizarre tableaus, and it kind of left a lasting impression. In fact, today, you mentioned a snake just now. I was sent a picture of, it's actually quite a badly stuffed python. It's 8 foot long and wrapped around a tree trunk. A close-up of the head reveals that it's actually not in great condition, but it's a Victorian piece of taxidermy, possibly about 120 years old. I think the person is trying to tempt me into buying it, but to be quite honest, it doesn't look too good, so I might give that one a miss.
Just real quick about Kevin too is I carved Frankenstein's monster into the rock, and mine's still in progress, and also carved a little Belial from basket case.
Oh, you had to, didn't you? Really?
Yeah, exactly, and that's sitting in my flower
rude
bed
not
right
to.
now. Yeah. And what is very cool is Annabelle is very artistic, and I'm not. And so, but we both had a great time doing that, and he showed both of us, a lot of attention and helped both of us with what we're doing. So he's a great teacher, and it was fun for someone who has done a lot of artwork and someone who hasn't. So it's cool.
Well, I think as an artist in all of us, and I think that people get hung up on literal representations, and it's not about that. I don't think at the end of the day. If you're a professional artist, maybe so, but I think for any of us, though, anything that has some sort of expression which is from within is very valid, and I just wish that everybody had some sort of outlets like this, though.
Yeah. All kidding aside, I am happy with my banners I made, and I've designed stuff for Barbie Wild and Simon Bamford to use them at conventions. So.
So you're not tempted by taxidermy then?
Taxidermy is very interesting. Yeah, I actually thought
I would absolutely do that.
I would too. When you brought it up, I was thinking maybe it went back to when you watched Psycho with Norman Bates.
Well, who knows? Could well be. I've moved from the mouse to the hamster. That's a little bit bigger, so I guess that, I think we're getting towards the human size eventually.
And anyone you have in mind that you would like to see stuffed?
There's actually a lot of people I don't like. I'd like to see stuffed, but no, I wouldn't stuff somebody I admired. I don't think. I did go to the Gunther von Hagen Body Worlds exhibition a few years back, and of course you could. I guess you know who the gentleman is, but he is famous for his plastinated corpses, which he then he plastinates the corpses and then sort of poses them. And interesting process, and with sort of some interesting results. And you could actually sign a book and sign up to donate your corpse for plastination in order to be created into a piece of artwork.
Huh. That's very interesting.
Yes. I didn't sign up.
No, I know you said these two animals. Is there, not a person, but is there a particular animal that you would like to do the taxidermy on? You'd like to stuff? If you had like the dream animal.
In terms of I don't think I'd gain the skills in I think it needs a number of years really with practice. No, there isn't anything particular. I don't think. I've recently acquired a Victorian piece, which is it's a fox, full-size fox, in a cabinet, and there's a little squirrel sitting on a branch next to it with eating a nut. And I think that's kind of dated about 1870 or something like that. And it's in very good condition as well, and it's actually quite well posed. I just think that there's a lot of bad taxidermy out there, and actually the snake I mentioned earlier on is one of those pieces. I don't know. I think
maybe a fictional creature, like a chimera or something.
Well, why not? But then, of course, that was another Victorian thing, wasn't it, to actually make up animals.
That's true.
And I remember going to an exhibition a couple of years back at the Natural History Museum, in fact, and it was all about the deep, sort of creatures at the bottom of the ocean. The sort of deep sea creatures, the things that look like little monsters, basically, which don't see light. And within the exhibition, apart from these beautiful specimens, preserved specimens, they did have what was referred to as a mermaid, and of course it was a Victorian fake. It was like some sort of nasty little sort of hybrid of one thing and another, with a sort of rudimentary head and sort of fishy tail and sort of limbs. Clearly, it wasn't a real thing, but they used to make these things and actually present them as real items, though. And well, why not?
Yeah. I wonder if that's still, I wonder if anyone does that today. If they do.
Oh, they do.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a little place up in North London called the Victor Wind. It's the Victor Wind Museum. In fact, it may well be called the Museum of Curiosities, but they do sell taxidermy items there, and there are kittens with wings and all sorts of strange little things there.
That might be something I might enjoy doing, actually.
This sounds like a place I'd very much like to go.
maybe our next trip.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be great. That would be fantastic.
I did want to ask you if you've ever done any paintings or artwork of Big Daddy or giant haystacks.
No, I should do though, shouldn't I?
Yeah, I would love to see those.
Well, as I say, it's very odd. One of those little things that fed into my imagination when I was young. I guess sort of mid to late 60s. My grandfather and my father were very heavily into the sort of wrestling matches you see on TV on a Saturday afternoon, and it's not quite the wrestling that you see now on TV. A sort of more low-key affair, and certainly a lot more. Well, I think theatrical, definitely, and probably more in the spirit of sort of Victorian vaudeville than anything else. But yeah, you'd have these incredible, bizarre characters, and Big Daddy, giant haystacks being among them. And I remember one particular character called the Wild Man of Borneo, who just had this incredibly long hair all over his face. You actually didn't see his face at all, and his character was very much a sort of wild man of the jungle. And this odd array of people. Kendo Nagasaki, a very famous wrestler here in the UK, used to always wear a mask, and it was a great thing that anybody he wrestled would want to try and unmask him, and he was unmasked once, I believe, and it's the once only though, and his career sort of finished a little while after that. But I do remember him having very odd eyes, and I was thinking, there's something going on there which is not quite usual, and hence probably the mask, I guess. But yeah, they used to have. I remember there used to be a female wrestler called Hellcat Hegarty and Mitzi Mauler. A sort of great little era of oddity.
You don't follow wrestling anymore?
No. I literally, I'm going back to that era, and I think it sort of disappeared off TV probably sometime in the 70s. British TV, certainly in terms of Saturday afternoon, and of course it's re-emerged now as something else completely different, and it's for me it is not the same thing. I quite liked this sort of strange kind of vaudevillian kind of almost very sort of sham. I mean, fixing of matches was just actually the order of the day. You just knew who was going to win because that's the way it went, and so it was more of a sort of panto than anything else. So
Yeah. I also host a pro wrestling podcast, and totally with you though. Back in the '80s and before into the '90s, it was much more fun, and just this. It's hard to explain to someone that hasn't watched wrestling. It's just this weird uh, combination of bizarre characters, and everything was over the top, and it was just something magical about it.
yeah, certainly, and levels of fitness didn't seem to be required. I mean, you look at pictures of giant haystacks and Big Daddy, you see what I mean. But certainly, they had they're real sort of villains, real heroes, the good guys, the bad guys, and even with the female wrestlers, you have the same thing. And it was great fun, but people just get so excited. So, and particularly the little old ladies who always sit at the front. I always used to think of the you had the little old ladies who apparently used to sit at the front of guillotinings and knitting away, as the blood flowed. And you almost kind of had this that these wrestling matches, all these little old ladies who'd be sitting at the front and just getting really, really excited and furious as well. They'd be up on the stage with their handbags. It was quite fascinating to watch.
Yeah, the Giant Haystacks is also quite the singer.
Well, this is so yet I've never heard him sing. I feel that I've missed out. Of course, I've seen the links you've sent, and I will be listening to that.
Yes. You will be. I'm sure you will be painting marvelous paintings to the Giant Haystacks music.
Well, it seems right to do, doesn't it? Really. Yes, I think there's a series to be made. Then the wrestlers of an era. I think I'm going to have to try and find. I've actually tried to look before. I can't find any pictures of the Wild Man of Borneo. They must exist somewhere, though.
Yeah, I actually just looked that up when you mentioned that, and I did find some here on Google. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't looking hard enough, obviously.
Yeah, there's a site that's called No Bad Hair Days Wrestling Heritage, and he is up there.
Oh, fantastic! I should be looking again that way too.
Yeah, he is. He does live up to the name, Wild Man of Borneo.
Well, yeah, actually, it's quite funny because when I first started listening to the Cramps, of course, the name Kid Congo Powers kind of immediately made me think of the Wild Man of Borneo.
Now, if people listening to the besides your website, how would people listen to the show if they don't know already? How would be the best way to contact you or follow you on the internet?
Well, I'm there on Facebook. Well, the website is the obvious way of doing it. There's an info at grahamhumphreys.com. That'll get you to me. Other than that, certainly if I've done work for anybody, just contact that company, and I'm sure they'll forward my information. But I'm hoping this year that there's going to be an exhibition of work here in London, and the plan is to publish a book of something around the number of about 130 odd illustrations, which will be spanning sort of 30 plus years work, from The Evil Dead through to whatever I'm doing right now, actually.
Now, have you ever, do you still, just for your own enjoyment, ever draw or paint, like a movie that you're not working with? Or a character from something?
Not now. I think when I was a lot younger, I would have done, simply because I had the time to do that. Really, I'm working quite hard on the projects I have, and if I get downtime, the last thing I'm going to want to do is carry on doing this stuff. So, no, but I mentioned the private commissions earlier on. So in some ways, those are fulfilling that kind of promise for me, that be able to work on films which I like, and actually doing those without constraint as well. So that kind of is there, I guess. I'm actually going to be entering a piece into an exhibition coming up again here in London at a Victorian horse hospital, of all places.
Really?
up in North London, and the theme is William Burroughs, and so everybody who's submitting pieces will be painting something which is related to it's either a picture of William Burroughs or pertaining to one of his books or writings. So I have something in mind, which is probably a little bit unexpected, and actually I'm going to use acrylic, and it will be on canvas as well. So I'm quite looking forward to doing that.
Hmm. Now, you did mention, being interested in the taxidermy. Now, what other forms of art have you worked in, besides, the illustrations and the paintings?
Well, this will make you laugh. When I was in my mid-teens, I used to make ships in bottles
Really?
and sell them at a local shop in the West Country.
Huh. Uh,
Yeah.
that's very cool, actually.
I guess you could describe that as another Victorian craft. I don't know what it is with Victorians, but they certainly kind of produce some odd things, and and we should celebrate that.
Yeah. I would assume that's a very time-consuming thing to do.
Not the way I did it then.
Oh, okay.
Really,
Then I would be totally wrong.
I didn't have a set of skills to be able to do quite the job that would merit any interest. They're quite crude, but I think I did attempt one of sort of the classics, which is you used to get these whiskey bottles. The brand was called Hague, and they were famously shaped, so it had like three sides, and it was the classic bottle that people would put little clippers into. So you'd have like the Cutty Sark being the classic clipper ship. We had a particularly large number of sails, and was a very complicated arrangement as well. But that was always the classic one you put into this bottle, which is perfect because you have the sea at the bottom, and then you'd have this kind of getting a narrow height to the bottle, which kind of fitted the shape perfectly, and the neck was very narrow as well. So it was a real. I did attempt one, and with sort of limited success, but yeah, I learned that probably I wouldn't be doing that for a living.
Mhm. Now, did you ever create an image or a monster or anything like that yourself? Throughout your years that you yourself would like to see become a movie?
Um, hmm, it's interesting. Possibly when I was younger, I would have probably wanted to have experimented a little bit more and use my imagination to do something, which was my own. To be quite honest, now I feel that other people are doing this way better than I could. It's a skill in itself, coming up with something original, an original monster. The only thing like that I've produced really would be the character I've painted for the festival posters each August here in London for the London Fright Fest, as a character who appears in certainly the last sort of 6 or 7 or so, and he's a character which I think will continue with the festival. He doesn't really have a name, but yeah, he's a character which I'm sort of getting to know, and perhaps maybe one day he may make it into film.
That's cool.
If you were commissioned to do a piece of any horror villain in any way you could think of, what would you want to do?
I would probably always go back to the sort of the classics. I mean, whether it's Frankenstein's monster, Jekyll and Hyde. I've got a love of all the older stuff, and perhaps even Quasimodo could do with a revisit. Other than that, I think I quite enjoy it. We talked about challenges earlier on. I like it when people come to me with a job, and then it's up to me to work with that material and try and create something which has a sort of form of direction. Maybe it's just in a brief description, but I do like to have something to start with, which isn't something which is mine, so that I can actually play off of somebody else's ideas. And I think that's the way, good stuff comes to fruition. It's like when you have, a sort of a partnership with somebody, or an outside stimulus that isn't something you could have expected. I think you kind of need these little odd things which are not something which you can find easily yourself. I think that's the challenge, and also where the interest lies.
Mm.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. It's been a wonderful time to talk to you.
Absolute pleasure.
And I love, both of us love your artwork, and I know many people listening to the show do as well. And,
well, I will continue to paint as long as I can. And
well,
people will like some of what I do.
If you ever want to do some pro bono work and do illustrations with me and Neil, we're totally open to that too.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll be sending some photos after the show now.
Fantastic.
So, thanks. It's been
great talking with you. I'm glad we've had the opportunity.
You as well. Great talking to you, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. And we do want to give a shout out to Lawrence Harvey, who I know is a big fan of your work.
He says hi.
Yeah.
Well, he's a very lovely man. I had the pleasure of meeting last year, and yes, I think we hit it off immediately. Though. Really, really, really lovely bloke.
This is Kevin Van Hentenryck, and you're listening to WithoutYourHead.com. And if you lift the lid of the basket, you die.